Good morning, Jan.
Good morning, Bruce.
This is our Friday call. I was going to say our normal Friday call, but we haven't been doing it on a normal basis. But it's always fun to get together on a Friday and talk to you, especially when something new or exciting has come up in connection with the project. Today, our idea was to talk about geography.
Yes, it's a very exciting but also very complex topic.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much geography in the Oera Linda, ranging all the way from the North Sea region and what is now Friesland, the Netherlands, all the way down through the Mediterranean into India. And some of those places are described quite in quite a lot of detail. But the most detailed description is of Friesland itself. And that's what we're going to focus in on today. We could do hours and hours about geography, but this is going to be the first installment. And a lot of the places we're going to talk about today are introduced in section 13I, which we call Along the Rhine. And I was just going to read a few little sections out from it as we go through today. But just to list some of the places that are mentioned, we may not talk about all these places, but in this section 13I, we talk about Lydasburg, and then there's the Alderga and the Alderga mouth. There's the Treasure Burg. There's the Burg Forana. There is the Flea Lake, as well as the Vliestroom. And then there's even a mention of Alkmarum. And so these are places that some of them can be easily, at least we find the names still in the Netherlands, Alkmaar.
Lydasburg is thought to be Leiden, or where Leiden is. But
Okay, that makes sense.
the problem
Sure.
is it's very tempting to assume that, for example, Medeiasblik will be Medemblik.
Yeah.
That Forana will have been Vronen. But some of the descriptions of these places would not really match with reality, if that is true.
Okay.
And it is very possible that some of the names have migrated.
So you're saying that the names still exist as they did back then, but it may actually be talking about a different place.
Exactly.
Well, that's the hard part about the geography of this region, and that's what people who aren't from the Netherlands or aren't familiar with the history of it. It's always changing, right? What we call the Netherlands looks nothing like Friesland.
Yes, that's one thing, the coastline and also the big lake here, the Zuiderzee. In the time of Oera Linda was the Vliemaar, the Flea Lake.
Mm-hmm.
It was much smaller. It's known from history that has been a great flood where much land disappeared. And also in Oera Linda it is described that many lakes, after a big flood, there were many new lakes in West Vlieland.
Right. So you would have to move a town or a city.
From coastal villages is also known that sometimes when a village was drowned, then they built a new village more inland and gave it the same name.
Right.
So if the old Medemblik was what is now water, then you won't find traces of the old Medemblik where now Medemblik is. And the same goes for Staveren. Disappearance of land because of floods is one thing, but it's also possible that when land was conquered by the enemy and the burg was lost that way and obviously renamed by the enemy, then the Freyas may have built a new burg or village and named it after the village that was lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may have been the case with Vronen, because Vronen that we know from the few sources is about 13th century Vronen. And even in 16th century sources they say, well, there is a legend that it was a big city But Vronen was only a little village, and Vronergeest, it cannot have been a city. So that must all have been fantasy. But if the old Vronen, the old Forana in Oera Linda was more south, and at some point it was conquered much earlier than the 13th century, then the 13th century Vronen may have been named after the old Forana. And they will also have, for example, if Forana was at a big lake, then they may also have named the new Vronen also would be located at a lake. I'd like to add something about the copying of names or the migration of names.
Yeah.
Of course, we know the example of New Amsterdam, which has become New York. Also in South Africa and in Australia, there are many place names that are sometimes exact copies of the original names here. Even New Zealand is named after the Dutch province Zeeland. Here in Greece I found, and this can be a coincidence, but there's Thessaloniki, which seems to be similar to Texel. Well, it is similar to Texel.
Okay.
And there's also Stavros, which is similar to Stavoren.
Yeah.
There are more places called Stavros in Greece.
And the Gert men in the Oera Linda, even within the book, pretty much everywhere they went, they named Germania.
Yes, there's a new Germania.
Yeah, there's a port of New Germania, right? And then they named the region that they ended up living in Europe when they came back, Germania. And then I guess the part of Punjab where they lived would have also been called Germania.
Yeah, and there's also an example of Nij-Vrijasburg, New Vrijasburg.
Right.
And at some point the new may be taken off, especially when the old Vrijasburg no longer exists.
Right. So the point being that you can't just draw conclusions based on possible false friends.
It can be very misleading, and this has been one of the reasons why academia has rejected Oera Linda, or even called it, Jensma used the term kolderiek, like real nonsense, because it doesn't seem to match with archaeological finds. One of the things that has been very unclear is the Alderga and the Alderga mouth.
Yeah.
And for a while I have tried to locate it in the more northern part of West-Friesland. On the wiki I added some maps to explain.
Can I read out the little section from 13i then
sure.
about the Alderga?
We'll do that first, yeah.
So 13i talks about the trip that Apollonia took along the Rhine all the way up to what is now Switzerland, and then down the other side of the Rhine. And so at some point, she says, all along the far side of the Rhine, it was the same, talking about how poor the people were, down to Lydasburg, which you said may be Leiden. This burg had a great lake where people also lived in houses set upon pilings. So there's a lake mentioned that may or may not exist anymore. And then she says, finally, we arrived at the Alderga mouth. At the southern head of the harbor stands the treasure burg, a stone building where a variety of shells, horns, weapons, and clothes are kept, brought home from distant lands by the steersman. A quarter's distance from there is the Alderga, a great lake surrounded by barns, houses, and gardens, all richly ornamented. Before we talk about where it was, we recently have just speculated about the etymology or what the word means, Alderga, and you had an interesting idea about what the name Alderga might mean.
Once it's Alderga, and then it could be old. Ga is the verb go. But there's also alder, like allerbeste, very best, the very best, the best of all. So Alderga with an R would mean where all go.
Yeah.
The name may suggest that the water was a passage for all ships from the Free Lake to Ralda Sea. And that's because there was a canal dug from Forana to a narrow mouth into the sea.
Correct. Yeah, in 13I it says, behind the lake a canal had been dug, which flowed past the Burg Forana and further through a narrow mouth into the sea. This was the way out for the fleet, and the flea was the way in. So because that's just the way it worked, you sailed in through the flea and you sailed out through this mouth into the North Sea. Alderga means that all ships went past.
I think so. So this is a reconstruction of Friesland in the times of Oera Linda or a bit later. And I don't know how accurate it is, but here's the flea máre, the flea lake in the middle. They could go out like this, especially if they go to the east. But I've tried to find the Alderga here, because Medemblik might have been somewhere here. Vronen would have been somewhere here. And then Egmond is a place which seems similar to Engamunda, the narrow mouth into the sea, but it's a bit more south.
Okay, yeah.
And it would make more sense to, if you dig a canal, to dig it like this, more north.
Closer to the, yeah.
Also, there's not a clear big entrance of a river here. I thought maybe at Schellinghout or at Hoorn, and it would obviously have been lost. But if it was the IJ, it's called, this water, near what is now Amsterdam, it would make more sense somehow, because if there's a burg on Texland, Freyasburg, and if Medemblik would be here, which would be a strategic location, a good location, and Stafford is here, if you see my arrow.
Yeah, I can see.
Then, if here's a Burg Forana, to me it seems that they're very close together, and then there would be nothing here. At least, Leiden would be here at the end of the Rhine, Lydasburg, and Walhalla would be here on the Seven Islands, which is now Zeeland.
Right. Which is where the votive stones of Nihilenia were found. And
exactly, yeah. This is done what is now the province of Friesland, but we'll focus on West-Vlieland now.
Yeah, what they called West-Vlieland is what we now call North Holland.
Yes, mostly, yeah.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
This would be a great passageway inland, a very strategic place to have.
So you're saying that could be the Alderga mouth?
This is a fragment of I think a 16th century map, and here's a place Muiden.
Yeah.
And this would be the southern part of the entrance of this water, which could be the Alderga. I don't know if it really was a big lake like this earlier. So this is where now Amsterdam is, and here is Muiden. And Muiden, it means mouth. Huh?
Right.
So if the ships come in like in the Flea Lake, if they come back from a journey, it would make sense if they stop here, take all the things out and give it to the treasure berg, and then go to the Alderga lake, where the whole fleet was said to be located.
Oh, I see. So that narrow lake would be the Alderga, and
this doesn't have to be a narrow lake. Yeah, it may have been a more narrow lake, of course, a narrow entrance. But the narrow entrance was where from the canal. If this was Forana, it's now Beverwijk. On this map, it's Beverwijk. And that corresponds with a lot of archaeological finds. On this map, it is shown where most archaeological sites are from the time that they call the Roman period. And there's a high concentration on Texel, which confirms that Texel was an important place.
Yes.
But also here in this area, Castricum Heemskerk, which is what I said earlier, Beverwijk is here. It's the end of the IJ.
I see. Okay,
and this is also a very strategic place to have, because if you come over land from the south, you must pass here. So it's good to have a strong burg there.
Interestingly enough, also in the language of the Oera Linda, they talk about the Alderga as a lake, so a máre.
Yeah.
But I think it says a máre ifta flít.
Yeah, flít.
Which would be more like a river. And so this kind of thick river lake kind of geographical or geological feature here. Mm-hmm. You could call it either a lake or a river.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so it's you can imagine that they had two terms for it. That they were not sure if they should call it a máre or a flít.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I didn't realize that looked like that.
But if you see Beverwijk here, and it's not clear what that name means. This is a great strategic location.
Right. So that could possibly have been the Warenburg.
No, the Warenburg I would locate here in Muiden.
Okay, so that end of the harbor. I didn't know which end of the harbor they meant.
Yeah, and then from here there would be a canal to what's called in the book a narrow mouth, Egmond, Engemunda. And that would make sense, because here is the big the dunes, and here is a very small part of the dunes. And I don't know if it was the same at that time, but that would make sense. And Alkmaar, because it says that Forana was north of Alkmaar. Alkmaar, as we know it now, is not a lake; it's a city.
Right.
But it means lake.
Correct.
And here more south, there were many big lakes, at some point at least. Right, the Haarlemmermeer, it's now all polder. Here also is the lake from Leiden, which is described, where the black people lived on pole houses.
Lydasburg, and there's islands there, as they said. Yeah.
Yeah. So Leiden is the end of the Rhine here, and then near Leiden, I don't know how. The Lydasburg may have been also not exactly on this place, but near perhaps. But what is here called Haarlemmermeer, or part of it, may have been the kmarum. And there is a place Alkmaar here. The explanation of that name Alkmaar, they also say it's similar to Alkmaar. It has the same root.
Mm-hmm.
So this would mean quite some shifting of place names. And this I region, much of it has become polder. It's now, and there's a canal to IJmuiden. Oh yeah, here's also a map of the Oer, the most ancient I, as they reconstructed, as it will have been in the more ancient time. So here's the mouth then, going like this, and then there's a lot more research to be done, like in geology.
Yeah, geology is probably going to be more helpful than archaeology.
Yeah.
Because as we said, the sea comes in regularly and takes everything and changes it as it will.
So in the 1870s they made polders here out of much of the original I.
Mm-hmm.
And this canal remained.
That's all that's left.
And here it was dug to IJmuiden, a new place name.
Mm-hmm.
So this part is artificial. From
Okay.
Velzen, here's the Beverwijk again.
It's interesting how the place names. I mean, if you've ever been in that region, you recognize the place names,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't. Before we started looking at this, I never thought about how those names. I mean, it was obviously that Muiden means mouth, right? But you don't think about how it came about. I don't know whether you do as a Dutch speaker or somebody who lived in that area. But that's IJmuiden, that's just what it's called, right? But now we see that there's lots of history and geographical history, or geological history behind it.
Yes, names are very fascinating, and even in the 16th century, of many place names, they had no clue what they originally meant.
Right. When you go searching for the history of the place names in that area, b- basically it's just all one big puzzle. No one knows.
Many places, yeah.
And then they could. I was looking into Valakrin and the votive stones of Nihilania, and they come up with every possible etymology for Nihilania except for
Yeah.
the one that is offered specifically in the Oera Linda.
Exactly. The same goes for Texel.
Yeah.
So there's so much more to say, but I'm a bit chaotic about this because I have many thoughts, many ideas, many graphics.
I think we made a good presentation about the Alderga and the where that might have been, and it's going to take, like you said, it's going to take an interdisciplinary decades of interdisciplinary study to figure out exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Yeah, that I started this thread on the forum, and I will make a better description, perhaps a better title, where I will add more maps like this with fragments from the book, and then a specific or a few geographical names and where I think they may be located. Some are more certain than others, like Texland is pretty sure that it was what is now this island.
Yeah.
The Vlie is also certain, the Wezer, the Ursara. Even the old spellings confirm that Ursara makes sense, as it is written in Oera Linda. Werzer, Wizera.
Right, absolutely. And the Vlie right there, where you have written the word Vlie in Freias, of course, that's now an island.
The Vlieland, yeah, here is Vlieland. And the polder here is called Flevoland, which is the Roman name.
The Roman word for Vlie, yeah.
Yeah. Here's the same map projected on a Google Earth map of Netherlands, Germany. And on the old forum on Unexplained Mysteries, there have been discussions about locations, and I've always been fascinated by it. But because of making the translation and the book, I had to focus on that part.
Yeah.
So I have to make some sense of this with help of the people in the forum, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, luckily there are some extremely smart and talented people involved in the forum.
Yeah, and there are many great discoveries to be made here. So it's a lot of fun to study this.
Yeah. All right, Jan. Well, I think we have presented about as much as we can, because that's about as far as the research has gone. But we will continue, and anyone out there listening is invited, of course, to give their opinions or information that we may not have in the comments below. I'd like to thank you for your time on this Friday.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay.
And have a good weekend.
Yeah, talk to you next time.